What if I told you that the book millions consider sacred wasn't written as a single book at all? That it was composed over 1,000 years by dozens of authors in 3 different languages and went through centuries of debate before anyone agreed on what should even be in it? Today, we're diving deep into the ancient origins of the Bible, exploring when it was written, who wrote it, and how this collection of texts became the most influential book in Western civilization. And stick around until the end, because we'll reveal a shocking discovery that changed everything we thought we knew about the Bible's earliest texts. Let's get into it.
First, let's establish something crucial. The Bible isn't one book. It's a library. The word Bible actually comes from the Greek biblia, meaning books, plural. The Old Testament, or Hebrew Bible, was written roughly between 1200 BCE and 1605 BCE. That's over 1,000 years of composition. The earliest texts likely include parts of Exodus and some ancient poems, while the latest books, like Daniel, weren't completed until the 2nd century BCE. The New Testament came much later, written between approximately 50 CE and 100 CE, all within a single century, which is remarkably fast by ancient standards. But here's where it gets interesting. None of the original manuscripts survive. Not a single one. What we have are copies of copies of copies. The oldest complete New Testament manuscript we possess dates to around 350 CE. That's 250 years after the last book was written. For the Old Testament, our oldest complete Hebrew manuscript is from around 1000 CE. So how do we know what the original said? That's where the science of textual criticism comes in, and where some surprising discoveries have been made.
The Bible was written in 3 languages: Hebrew, Aramaic, and Greek. Most of the Old Testament was written in Hebrew, with portions of Daniel, Ezra, and 1 verse in Jeremiah written in Aramaic, the common language of the Near East during the Persian period. The New Testament was written entirely in Koine Greek, the everyday language of the Eastern Mediterranean in the 1st century. Now, who wrote these texts? Despite what tradition tells us, the authorship is far more complex and mysterious than you might think. Moses didn't write the first 5 books of the Bible, called the Torah or Pentateuch. Modern scholarship has shown these books are composite works, woven together from multiple sources over centuries. How do we know? Because the text contradicts itself. There are 2 creation stories in Genesis, 2 different versions of the 10 Commandments, and the book of Deuteronomy describes Moses' death and burial from Moses' perspective. King David didn't write all the Psalms. Many Psalms are attributed to other authors, and some contain references to events centuries after David's death. The Gospels, Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John, were likely not written by Jesus' disciples. They're anonymous texts, and the names were attached later by church tradition. Most scholars date Mark, the earliest gospel, to around 70 CE, 40 years after Jesus' death. The real authors? Priests, prophets, scribes, poets, historians, and everyday believers writing and editing over generations. Here's something that might surprise you. In many biblical stories have parallels in older, non-Israelite texts. The flood narrative in Genesis bears striking similarities to the Epic of Gilgamesh, a Mesopotamian story written centuries earlier. Both feature a hero warned by a god who builds a boat, survives a catastrophic flood, and sends out birds to find land. The biblical law codes share features with the Code of Hammurabi, a Babylonian legal text from around 1750 BCE, several centuries before the Torah was written. Creation stories similar to Genesis 1 appear in older Babylonian texts like the Enuma Elish. Does this mean the Bible plagiarized? Not exactly. Ancient writers didn't view borrowing and adapting stories the way we do today. They were part of a shared cultural conversation across the ancient Near East. The biblical authors took these common stories and reshaped them to reflect their own unique theology and worldview. What makes the Bible distinctive isn't that its stories are completely original. It's how those stories were transformed to convey monotheistic beliefs in a world dominated by polytheism. The Israelites were also influenced by their historical circumstances. The Babylonian exile in the 6th century BCE was a watershed moment. Many scholars believe significant portions of the Hebrew Bible were either written or substantially edited during and after the exile, as the Jewish people grappled with catastrophic loss and sought to preserve their identity. Now for that shocking discovery I mentioned. In 1947, a Bedouin shepherd boy threw a rock into a cave near the Dead Sea and heard something break. What he'd found would revolutionize biblical scholarship: the Dead Sea Scrolls. Hidden in 11 caves near the ancient settlement of Qumran were over 900 manuscripts dating from the 3rd century BCE to the 1st century CE. This was a game changer because these texts were 1,000 years older than any previously known Hebrew Bible manuscripts. What did they reveal? First, the good news. The texts were remarkably consistent with later manuscripts. This showed that Jewish scribes had been extraordinarily careful in copying the scriptures over centuries. But there were differences, variations in wording, entire passages that appear in some versions but not others, and alternate arrangements of texts. This revealed that in the centuries before the Common Era, there wasn't one standardized Hebrew Bible. Multiple versions circulated simultaneously. The scrolls also included many non-biblical texts, community rules, apocalyptic writings, and commentaries, giving us a window into the diverse Jewish world of the Second Temple period. This was a time of intense religious creativity, and the Bible as we know it hadn't yet been finalized. So, when did the Bible become the Bible? For the Hebrew Bible, the process was gradual. The Torah was likely recognized as authoritative by around 400 BCE. The prophets were accepted by about 200 BCE. But the final section, the writings, wasn't fully settled until somewhere between 70 and 100 CE, after the destruction of the Second Temple. Even then, different Jewish communities accepted different books. The Septuagint, a Greek translation made for Jews living in Egypt, included several books that Hebrew-speaking Jews didn't accept. This would later cause division between Catholics and Protestants over the Apocrypha. The New Testament canon took even longer. Early Christians had access to dozens of Gospels, Acts, Epistles, and Apocalypses, far more than the 27 books we have today. There were Gospels attributed to Thomas, Peter, Mary Magdalene, and others. How did the Church decide? Through a centuries-long process of debate, usage, and eventually official decisions. The criteria included apostolic origin, orthodox content, and widespread acceptance. But it was messy. Different regions favored different texts. The first time we see the exact 27 books of our New Testament listed together is in a letter by Athanasius, Bishop of Alexandria, in 367 CE. But even after that, debate continued for decades. Some churches accepted books like the Shepherd of Hermas while questioning Revelation. The Bible as a closed, authoritative collection, a canon, emerged gradually through centuries of religious practice and debate. So, what have we learned? The Bible wasn't dictated from heaven as a complete book. It's an ancient library composed over more than 1,000 years by dozens of authors writing in 3 languages. These authors drew from older sources and were influenced by the cultures around them. The texts were copied, edited, debated, and eventually collected into the canon we recognize today, but that process took centuries. Does knowing this diminish the Bible's significance? That depends on your perspective. For scholars and historians, understanding the human process behind the Bible makes it more fascinating, not less. It's a testament to generations of people wrestling with ultimate questions about God, meaning, justice, and human purpose. Whether you approach the Bible as sacred scripture or as ancient literature, its origins tell a remarkable story about how humans create, preserve, and transmit meaning across millennia. What's your take? Does the human history of the Bible's composition change how you view it?